Hello and welcome back to Diddy on Trial from the BBC World Service YouTube channel with me, Anoushka Mutanda-Dougherty. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss a thing. Here at the Southern District of New York Court in Lower Manhattan, it's 4 p.m. and court has just finished for the day. Before we get into things, a reminder. Diddy is charged with sex trafficking, transportation for prostitution and racketeering with conspiracy, all of which he has consistently denied. Just a warning, this episode contains descriptions of violence and graphic descriptions of sex. Now, this is our roundup episode today, so you're going to be hearing from our resident criminal defense attorney later, Shaun Kent. But first of all, we have the BBC's New York correspondent, Nada Tawfik, to walk us through what was said in court today and go through what's been said for the rest of the week. Hi, Nada.
Hi, Anoushka.
Nada, let's start with today. The woman testifying on the stand is using the pseudonym Jane to protect her identity. What did she have to say?
Yeah, well, Jane went right to the beginning of when she met Diddy. She said she met him on a girls' trip to Miami and that they didn't get together right away, but eventually they did in 2021. And she talks about how he was extremely charming, how their first date lasted 5 days. She, at the end of it, they said started using the L word for love. And she talks about how she was open with him, that she had a son with someone who he didn't get along with, and that she had also been with somebody who was close to him previously, but that Sean, as she called him, Diddy, said that hadn't bothered him at all. And she said that really it was Diddy who started to introduce drugs more regularly into her life, having Molly, ketamine, ecstasy, pretty frequently in their sex life. And there was a moment on the stand where she actually started crying. It was the only moment she started crying and actually dabbed her eyes, the tears away from her eyes with a tissue. And that's when she spoke about May 2021. And she said that was the first time that Diddy introduced the idea of these fantasies. Now, they didn't call them freak-offs. Again, these kind of drug-fueled sex nights with male escorts. They called them debauchery nights or hotel nights. And she said that there was a real pattern to these nights. She would have to be dressed in lingerie. She would have to wear stripper heels. She would have cream-colored light nails. Her hair would be straight or up in a ponytail. Again, they would be in mostly hotel rooms with red lights. And the escorts, she describes how they came from this company that Diddy had used in the past. She describes the first one being introduced to a man being extremely nervous, actually asking for the escort to use a condom. And while Diddy was reluctant at first, she testified, he eventually did use a condom. But she said that first night, while she was kind of exhilarated by it, she felt it was very taboo and it was exciting. She said it was like opening a Pandora's box after a while because she couldn't shut it. She said ultimately she didn't want to do it. She started telling Diddy later that she didn't want it. But he was very dismissive of her concerns, she testified. He would say, fine, we don't have to do it then. You're crazy. Let's not talk about it. And she said, and yet they would still have to do it. And at a certain point, she felt pressure because he was paying her rent at about $10,000 a month. So Jane on the stand describing very much the early stages of the relationship, how these hotel nights played out, with some graphic detail about just even the escorts, ejaculating on her at the end, and that kind of being something that Diddy would expect before they themselves would be intimate, and just how that made her feel, especially with the financial pressures and her saying she could never really get her own job. It was a lot of pressure to look a certain way for Diddy and to be available at his beck and call, essentially.
And the prosecution kept coming back to the date range of May 2021 to October 2023. We learn that Jane and Diddy take a break in October 2023, but they asked her, how many of your sexual encounters were these hotel nights during that period? And she said, quite a high amount.
She said 90% of sexual interactions were with other men, and that these hotel nights, they could last, again, as we heard from Cassie, for days. She said she would be awake over 24 hours without stopping these hotel nights. And she spoke about how, she again expressed she didn't want to do these things, but she would hurry them along because she felt like she just wanted to speed them up because it was inevitable that they were going to happen. And that even though she did get alone time with Diddy, it never really felt like that. It felt like their whole relationship became these hotel nights.
But that's not all that happened today. Diddy was actually warned by the judge about some of his contacts within the courtroom.
Yeah, this was after the court kind of wrapped for the morning and everyone was about to go on lunch break. And the judge said that he noticed Diddy kind of making like facial expressions at jurors during testimony. And he said he had previously actually warned the defense that that was inappropriate, that Diddy shouldn't be trying to interact with them or make any kind of expressions, and that if he continued to do that, he would let prosecutors kind of intervene or, in worst case scenario, even kick Diddy out of court. He said it was just completely unacceptable. So a warning that Mark Agnifilo, Diddy's lawyer, said he understood and that they would take care of it.
Now, Jane was a big moment this week, but another big one was Bana Bongolan, Cassie's friend, taking the stand. What did she have to say?
Yeah, and you know, it was interesting because the judge actually asked prosecutors directly, you know, what is the key piece of Bana's testimony to your case? And they said this shows an element of coercion to show that Cassie and those around her felt that there were threats from Diddy. Bana outlined first how at a photo shoot one point Diddy told her, you know, I'm the devil, I could kill you. Also outlined how she had seen Cassie with a black eye or some bruises a few occasions, but obviously the massive part of her testimony was what's being referred to, I should say, as the balcony incident in court. Bana says that she was sleeping at Cassie's apartment and Diddy started banging the door loudly. She kind of threw her girlfriend into the bathroom, told her to be quiet, went onto the balcony, and as Diddy rushed in, she claims that he picked her up under her arms, dangled her over the balcony, and then threw her aggressively back onto the balcony furniture. And she says he kept screaming at her, and Bana said, I don't know what I did. And so in court, again, just going through cross-examination of that story, and what we saw from the defense was kind of building up a timeline and showing that when Bana says this photo of her bruises was taken by the metadata on her phone, that it actually coincided with Diddy being on tour in New York, being on the Bad Boy reunion tour, having events at Macy's and other events with Cassie. So the defense trying to suggest that Bana had been lying about this happening and really just eating into her credibility, with Bana a few times saying, I don't recall, had Nicole Westmoreland, Diddy's defense lawyer, telling her, you know, you put your civil lawsuit forward with the understanding that you had to allege sexual assault, didn't you? Again, hammering her on this idea that she said she was sexually assaulted, then said she wasn't. Bana responded, I don't recall. And that was a common theme, her saying, I don't remember, I don't recall, during cross-examination.
And again, we came back to the CNN footage, that leaked footage of the assault on Cassie in the hallway of a hotel in 2016. But this time we were hearing about it from the perspective of Eddie Garcia, who was a security guard at the Intercontinental Hotel. And he filled in what he said happened from his perspective.
That's right. He got immunity to testify, and he spoke about how he was handed $100,000 in a paper bag by Diddy and asked to sign an NDA to hand over the security footage. He said he split that money with other colleagues of his in the office. He went and got himself a used car, and it was his understanding that the woman he spoke to on the phone after the money that was handed over was Cassie, saying that she had a movie premiere, she just wanted this all to go away. And Eddie said he was nervous. He didn't really even get to read through the whole NDA. He just quickly signed it because it had, Combs Enterprises at the top. The defense on cross-examination did point out that the NDA didn't preclude him from speaking to law enforcement. That could be a nod to trying to fight this idea that there was obstruction of justice. But certainly when you look at this testimony from Eddie Garcia, it is very crucial to the government's case, right? That this was all part of racketeering.
Finally, we began the week with Mia on the stand. Mia's using a pseudonym to protect her identity, and it was the tail end of her cross-examination. It was a similar theme to the beginning of her cross-examination.
Yeah, that's right. The end of her cross-examination was, again, just kind of going over some of her, flattering messages to Diddy, how she stayed in touch with him, and going over why she would do that if he is somebody who had traumatized her, going over a message she sent after she lost her position at Revolt, where she, talks about wanting to harm herself, how her life is over. And she explained on the stand that even though it wasn't a great job, that, she has trauma from it, in the moment, it felt like it was her whole world. And that's why it was so upsetting for her. And that's why she reacted that way. But very much the cross-examination, trying to discredit her, digging into all of these messages she had sent to Diddy all along.
Nada, thank you so much for breaking that down for us.
My pleasure.
That was the BBC's New York correspondent Nada Tawfik, and just a reminder, Diddy denies all the charges. Now, on Wednesday, I caught up with our resident criminal defense attorney, Shaun Kent, to go through some of what's happened this week, but also answer your amazing questions.
Hi, Sean.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm good. Today was interesting. We had Barna on the stand. You said that nothing that happens in this trial is a shock for anybody, either the prosecution or the defense. And particularly a witness for the prosecution, they should know, kind of their temperament, what they're going to say, what they can remember, what they can't. Now, for 80% of the cross-examination, Barna's answers were, I don't know, I don't remember, I can't recall, even up until talking about conversations she's had with the prosecutions 2 days ago. Why would you put somebody on the stand who's going to do that for the whole cross-examination?
Well, I guarantee you they didn't know it. And we've interviewed a lot of people get on stand, you freeze. And I guarantee you, like if you remember the witness before her, Mia, remember they said they met with her 27 times. And they probably met with her 27 times to make sure they knew how she was going to be. Because you think you can prep a witness for a stand, but until you get on the stand and you're looking at the person, you freeze. It's sort of like an actor getting stage fright. It's the exact same theory. And you never know what someone's going to do until they testify. So that's probably what happened. But I read that the cross-examination went well, but not even that the cross-examination went so well that the witness did so poorly. And that can, and one bad witness, I've told you, can hurt your entire case.
The other thing I don't get is the prosecution have the same notes that the defense have, i.e. notes that they took that in the pre-trial meetings that they have, right? So the defense were drawing out, in the first meeting, you said this happened. In the next meeting, you said you were in a completely different place. In the third time, you said that different people were there, or, just using that as examples. But those are all discrepancies that the prosecution should have picked up on beforehand. But it didn't seem like there was, it seemed like this was coming completely out of the blue. And the only thing that she knew what to do was say, I don't remember.
And that's such a big defense. You know how many times I've called it the 8-mile defense? Tell everybody the bad stuff about the witness before you let the cross-examination happen. You get the bad out. Do you have a criminal record? Have you been in trouble with these things? Tell me, do you do drugs? You get all that out because it doesn't have the same shock value as it will when the witness is being cross-examined, and that's the problem. But my gut reaction is they did not know she was going to, either they did not know she was going to do so poorly, or they knew she was going to do so poorly. And it's almost worse if you don't put the witness in, because then everyone's like, okay, I wonder why they're not having her testify. Maybe she was lying. So you don't have a choice. You're like, we knew she was going to be bad, but we're putting her on the stand anyway.
With Barna, one of the narratives that was offered a few different times that you might not have picked up on if you weren't kind of doing this as your morning, noon and night job. They've spoken about her before during Kerry Morgan's testimony. When they speak about Barna, they kept saying, oh, and Barna would buy drugs, right? Or supply Cassie with drugs, or supply you guys with drugs. Just kind of pipetted through different people's testimony. And then today they really drew that out from her. And she was forthcoming and said, yes, we did a lot of drugs together. And yes, a portion of my income was made from Cassie buying drugs off me. How does that diminish her credibility?
Well, after a while, you start realizing, and there's a little phrase that prosecutors will use. The devil doesn't hang out with angels. The devil hangs out with devils. So in other words, these are bad people, so they're going to hang out with other bad people. The defense's standpoint is going to be, you cannot trust anything that these folks are saying. They're drug dealers. They're drug users. They don't have credibility. And so if her credibility is slightly shot from the defense standpoint, it's like you cannot trust her.
Now, look, we had another big witness for the prosecution, which was Mia. What were your reflections on her testimony now that it's come to an end?
I don't know if you saw the filing that came out. The government now wants to recall their expert. They want to recall the doctor as a result of the cross-examination that happened on Mia. Remember the text messages that came out, the Ara Kelly information that came out, all of this stuff that came out about Mia. And the fact that the defense is trying to make it seem like she liked him, she enjoyed him, she put stuff about his social media out. Well, they want to call that same expert to explain coercive control. They sent a filing to the court and said, we want to recall her and explain that this is the reason why she testified this way. And this is the reason why she still loves Puffy and didn't realize it till later, because this is the cycle of abuse that we were talking about Cassie, and it also has an effect on Mia. So that's what I thought was interesting, is that it's pretty clear that the government is filing this motion because they thought the cross-examination of Mia must have gone well for the defense. And now they want to recall the expert to basically rehabilitate their witness and say, this is why she was sending all these loving, adoring text messages back and forth.
Let's talk about Eddie Garcia, because I know you've had a lot of questions about what is bribery, what constitutes bribery and what isn't, and whether Eddie Garcia was speaking to an instance of bribery. Eddie Garcia being the security guard who took the $100,000, hands over the USB stick. We know was not the only copy of the assault on Cassie, but takes the money, hands it over. Bribery or not bribery?
Yes and no. Now that I've had and it's a fascinating legal reason. And let me tell you why. And this is fascinating. When you go back and look in the indictment, I have finally been able to understand what the government is doing. In the classic sense of the word, in the federal parlance, it is not bribery. Why? Generally in bribery, in the federal rule, we deal with public officials, governors, mayors, cops. Usually you have somebody who has been bought off to do something in an official act. You go to somebody and you say, I want you to vote for this bill. I want you to pass this legislation. That's bribery generally in the federal sense. It is a predicate act, and it's one of the predicate acts that they need to do. So I went back and looked at the indictment because I'm like, there's some reason why the government is putting this witness on. When you go back and look at the indictment and you look under RICO and you look under the predicate acts, they talk about California state law. Okay. They don't just mention federal law, they go under California state law. They specifically mention California Penal Code 137. So then it dawned on me, I'm just like, oh my God. In a RICO case, you can also use state law to prove a federal crime. So what they did is they made allegations of state California bribery to prove federal RICO. And why that's important is under the state of California, which is way easier to prove bribery, all they got to prove is if somebody offers you money not to tell something to law enforcement, that's bribery. That's it. That's a state level bribery claim. And so when I looked it up, I literally looked it up probably 30 minutes before we talked. I'm like, dang, that makes sense on why they're doing. And even though it's a state level act, it still counts under federal RICO.
And we've got some questions. We've actually got a lot of questions, and they're really, really good questions.
Why is everyone so much smarter than me? I don't like that.
Well, we've been coming to class. We're ready to go. This is from Charlotte in North Yorkshire in the UK.
Hi, Charlotte.
If the people who were testifying against Diddy also used to work for him and were involved in the enterprise, how come they are not accused with Diddy? Okay, so this is the question.
Yes, all of these individuals are part of the enterprise. Okay, and that's the first part of RICO. You must prove a criminal enterprise. Well, here comes the second part. You still got to prove two predicate acts. Just because these people are watching this, what are the predicate acts that they've actually committed? That's why they're able to go with Diddy. Diddy has committed the arson. Diddy has committed the kidnapping. Diddy has committed the bribery. The other big reason why the federal government is going after all of these charges under RICO is the statute of limitations in California on most of these charges have already passed. So a lot of these people couldn't be convicted of crimes in the states where they occurred. If I was defending anybody in the Diddy sphere who worked for Combs Enterprise, I would be like, that dude did it. We had nothing to do with that. Because if you remember what Cassie said, how many people were in the freak off? Her and the dude and Diddy. Mm-hmm. So Christina Crum's like, I wasn't in no freak off. I didn't get an invitation. I mean, the arson. We don't know who committed the arson. The kidnapping, that was Diddy. You understand? They're all able to say Diddy did the predicate acts, nobody else.
And just a reminder of people tuning in now, what is a predicate act?
A predicate act to prove RICO. RICO, of course, is the Racketeer Influence Corrupt Organization Act. The purpose of the RICO was created to get the mob. The reason we were trying to get the mob is we're trying to make a way to get seemingly unrelated crimes that are being ordered by an underboss, if you will, or the Marvel villain as he has been described. So there's a hierarchy. There's somebody on the top of the RICO who is ordering similarly unrelated acts. And so in a mob situation, if they said, hey, Bobby, I want you to go rob the bank. Jesse, I want you to go shoot that fella. And Tony, I want you to go steal some sardines. Those are seemingly unrelated, but they wanted to be able to tie the person who was ordering things together. To get RICO, they've got to say that we've got to prove that this is a pattern of criminal activity. So there are certain crimes that are considered predicate acts that are crimes. And so what the federal government must prove is that there are certain crimes that are put together that create the RICO. And to make it a little even more simple, the federal government is saying the purpose of the Combs enterprise is to make sure Combs can have these butt naked baby old freak off, awful sex trafficking parties. What does he do to enable his action? He has committed an arson to blow up somebody's car who tried to go after his girlfriend, Cassie. He has brought prostitutes over county lines or state lines to help him do his actions. He has hurt individuals to make them get his actions. So the government has to prove that at least 2 of these go together to create RICO.
This is an anonymous question that we got through, but I think this is so important for people who've been engaged with this trial from the beginning. It says, hi, at the start of the trial, I thought this was going to be lifting the lid on the big parties that Diddy was throwing and looking at what everyone was getting up to there. Actually, it is very focused on Diddy and what he and his girlfriends were up to in hotel rooms with maybe one extra guest. Will there be a wider look at those parties, examining who was doing what there?
The reason that people got so excited about it is everyone's just making stuff up. Everybody just made these allegations that, oh, you know, this person and this person and this person, they were all at this party. And then when you heard Cassie testify, she's like, whoever told y'all that? There's me, this other dude, and Diddy in the room. And so people made these allegations without the actual factual support. And until, I've said it to a million people, until you hear it testified in court, it didn't happen. You know, we had all these people making these broad allegations that there were going to be things about minors involved. Nobody's testified about anything about minors, anything about children, anything about these allegations. They haven't come up. And until they come up in a courtroom, it doesn't happen. Now, if, big capital IF, if Diddy is convicted and if he gets a massive sentence in the federal sentencing guideline range, he is able to then cooperate if he wants to get his sentence reduced. But let's say for argument's sake, he has all this co-conspiracy information about people that they want to know. He can cooperate to get his time cut. That is allowed in the federal system. So if he did have information and got convicted and went to jail for life, he could get his time reduced if he wanted to.
Just one small question. Wouldn't he have to offer up somebody else bigger than him? Because if he was like, oh, this rapper that nobody's ever heard of was doing this, wouldn't they be like, okay, we'll shave off 2 days?
I love that question. And it usually happens when we're representing individuals who are dealing with drug dealers, okay? And usually what ends up happening is exactly what you said. Somebody gets busted. They're on a conspiracy. They're, you know, trafficking drugs all over the United States. They get busted like, well, I want my time cut. I'm looking at 30 years. And they say, I can give you a bunch of middling small drug dealers. Well, what ends up happening is the federal government says, sure, give us all of those people. We'll take 2 years off your sentence, exactly like you said. But for us to cut your time, you need to give us somebody who has more drugs than you got arrested with. So it's the same theory with Diddy. You want a substantial cut? Give us somebody we care about.
Thank you so much, Sean. We really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you.
That was criminal defense attorney Shaun Kent from South Carolina, and that's it for this episode of Diddy on Trial from the BBC World Service YouTube channel with me, Anoushka Mutanda-Dougherty. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss a thing, and keep sending us your brilliant questions on WhatsApp at +44 330 123 551. That's +44 330 123 551.